This is a series we're starting today. It's going to go through March the 12th. And I've entitled it the idea that we are viewing and validating those things which are our values. And the purpose for that, we need to look and see what the Scriptures teach about the things that we ought to treasure. And we as elders have done that over the last almost year. And those things that we treasure, we need to sort through and get rid of those things that will clog up the ministries that we are supposed to have. Those things that will interfere, those things that will hinder. And we're focusing on the filters, our value system, that clean out the things that clog up our system. And as we do that, we as an elder board have determined that there are 6 core values that our congregation ought to embrace and say, you know what, this is what we're all about. And we've determined as an elder board that it was time for us to identify, what are we all about? Who are we? What is our focus? And therefore, we see where in the next several weeks we're going to be talking about these values. And they are on that. This is a logo that you're going to see many times. You're going to see it on our bulletins. You're going to see it on our paperwork. You're going to see it because we want to emphasize the fact that we're all about biblical truth. That's the number one thing. But then next, we have on that list prayer and worship. They were right hand in hand together as far as vital values that we carry out. And we see on there where we have evangelism. That's an essential too as far as a church. We need to be reaching out with the good news of Jesus. And then finally, we have both fellowship and encouragement. And we're going to spend the next several weeks, talking about how these things, how they play out in our lives. The impact they make on it. What happens when we center on biblical truth? What happens when we do this? And that's what we're going to be doing. But today we're looking at the idea that there is a way in which our values are formed. Our values are determined by certain things. And I've entitled this message today, More to be Desired Than Gold. And the subtitle on that is The Relationship That Matters Most. And as we navigate through the world today, as we walk around and determine just what am I going to do today? What emphasis? I mean, Rob made the comment. And obviously he wasn't talking about everybody here because my favorite team is not the Packers. And you've forgiven me for that, and I thank you. But, you know, the idea that there are certain priorities that we set for our lives. And as we look around and evaluate what is important to me, here's a guy with question marks on both sides of his face. And he's evaluating, okay, now what about my relationship with God's Word, with church? Do I get in the van and take my family to church, or do I get some fancy sports car or fancy sedan there that boy, that'll impress the folks? Do I spend time watching movies and TV and media? You know, how about money? How does that affect my life? And as we look at all the things that distract us, there are multiple. And that's all key. And the question that I ask, I have a series of questions here as we get started. How many different influences affect the way that I do life? How many different influences affect the way that I live my life, the way that I do life as the little acronym goes, or the little idea goes? Or to say it in another way, or to list them, you know, there's the whole issue of work or school schedules. They affect our lives. Family needs and concerns. We all have different areas of how that affects the way we plan our lives, plan our schedules, the way we do life. our hobbies and personal interests. Sometimes they get squeezed out. Sometimes they become huge. Our friends and other relationships, they affect us. Fun activities, pleasure that we seek. Technology and media. Has that ever changed our lives? That has made so much difference. I was thinking this week that I don't, and it's funny, I can't imagine what it's like for the kids that have never grown up without all the technology we have. But yet, you know what? I realize how much I rely upon it. And it affects us. The chores in my to-do list, that affects my schedule. Some people are task-oriented and some people are so flexible that they'll do whatever has to be done and they don't ever have a schedule. Some people would think that's what I'm like, but no, I have a very, very key schedule that I keep. But yet I have to recognize that my life is filled with the tyranny of the urgent. And things come our direction, come our way all the time. So these things, these influences affect the way we do life. They affect the idea of us being able to dig in deeply in discipleship and allowing the relationship we have with Jesus Christ to develop and grow. They affect that. But now, the question that we ask then, in view of those things, how do I determine my priorities about what's most beneficial? What's most valuable? Or what's most important? How do I determine those priorities? How do I bring a pecking order into the system? Do we rank things rigidly and say, well, this is always first? We think we do, but we really don't. And that leads us to the question, how do I find time for the things that I know are important? They're important enough to be priorities. They're important enough to be top of the list. But they get squeezed out because my schedule becomes out of control. What happens? How's that work? A couple more questions and then we're going to dig into God's Word. If someone would make an objective, unbiased analysis of each of our lives, look at us and say, okay, I'm watching, I'm seeing what's up. They'd look at our activities, our regular routine, our spending habits, our personal decisions. What would they determine to be the things that we treasure most, that we cherish or value as most important? I believe that every one of us would be surprised at what an objective, unbiased observer would say as they watch our lives. They would find that we would find that we spend a lot of time or a lot of effort in areas that we don't ever expect to be priorities. But that's the way life works. So therefore, the final question before we dig into God's Word is, where does my relationship with the Lord Jesus Christ fall on the list of things that I treasure, cherish, and value? Where does Jesus fit in? Would an observer be able to say that the Lord is important to me? We're looking at Matthew 6, verses 19 through 24 this morning. I'm going to read through the whole passage right now, and we'll look at each section of this as we go through. But in Matthew 6, verses 19 through 24, we read and we see, follow along on the screen, where it says, "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, where thieves break in and steal. But instead, store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The eye is the lamp of the body. So then if your eye is clear, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light that is in you is darkness, how great is that darkness? No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth. That's our passage. That's the text that we're looking at. And I want us to understand that in this section, Jesus is speaking, and what he says in these 6 verses, I believe they motivate us to ask ourselves 3 challenging questions about our lives. Now, I'm going to ask more questions through the course of this message, but there are 3 main questions that we ask. And the first thing that we see, the first thing that we consider here is the question of, am I making wise investments? And that's not strictly money, because he's talking in that passage about, am I storing up treasures on earth? Am I accumulating and collecting things that are useful here on earth, but they're no good for me when I get into the afterlife? Or am I storing up treasures that count for eternity? And as we look at the passage once more, we read it one more time. I think repetition is vital. It's good. Where Jesus speaks and says, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, where thieves do not break in or steal. For where your treasure is, where the things that are most important in your life, where you find them, you will also find your heart. Now, as we look at this, he's telling us that we should make an accurate assessment of what we value. We should make an accurate assessment of what we value. And in doing so, we need to be honest and objective. We can't just pretend. I'll just say this now and I'll get it over with. I love the songs. I Surrender All is a scary song to me, because I think many times when we sing that song, we lie. Because it's easy to sing, it's hard to do. Do I really surrender all? Can I be honest and objective about the way I assess my life and my lifestyle? Can I count the cost? Can I measure the motives that I have? Can I evaluate the efforts that I make for this or for that? Can I truly examine the effect? An accurate assessment of what I value. Now, as we do that, we realize that he's saying there, I think Jesus is telling us that I need to make an accurate assessment of, what am I accumulating? What am I accumulating? And as we consider that, accumulating, that word, store up treasures. It's interesting, the Greek language sometimes is filled with word pictures. And this is a case where there's a word picture here of what Jesus is saying. The disciples and those listening, they could envision in their minds certain ideas from the words that Jesus used. And the word that he used, store up, refers to several different ideas that all tie together. They refer to the idea of stockpiling or hoarding something. Have any stockpilers here? Have any hoarders? There's certain things that I stockpile. There's certain things that I don't want anything to do with. But yes, what am I stockpiling? What am I hoarding? It refers to a collection of stuff. One man's treasure is another man's garbage, sometimes people say. It refers to saving because it gives me a sense of security. I feel good because I've collected this. I feel good because I've accumulated this. It's the idea of impressing others or making ourselves feel more important. That's involved in that storing up word. It's the idea of, where do I place my trust? Where is my confidence? On what do I depend? And as we water this down a little bit or summarize to some extent what I'm accumulating, it's one of two issues. It's either for personal pleasure that will need to be renewed or replaced frequently. We are accumulating things that provide us personal pleasure. You know, for those of you that aren't Cub fans like me, you want to know something? What happened in the first week of November when the Cubs finally won the World Series, it's faded away. If the Packers happen to win today, and if they happen to win in 2 weeks and win the Super Bowl, it's going to be great for a few weeks. But it's going to fade away. There's no eternal value in things like that. I'm not saying it shouldn't be something we do, but let's recognize, let's count the cost. Let's understand how it all ties together. Am I accumulating personal pleasure that needs to be renewed and replaced frequently? Or am I accumulating things that are for God's pleasure that reap eternal rewards? That never fade away. It's a challenging question. When I'm accumulating, it's either something that loses its value, moth and rust destroy, or thieves break in and steal. You know, when I was in Dallas, back years ago when I was in Dallas Seminary, I worked for a very, very, very wealthy family. I was their gardener. I grew up on a farm, so therefore I fit the bill when I saw that sign on the seminary board for a job, and I went and applied for it, and they said, "Sure, you work." So I went to work for them as their gardener, and you know, it's interesting. They lived in a very beautiful neighborhood in Dallas, and they were wonderful Christian people. They loved the Lord Jesus Christ. The owner of the home, the man of the house, was on the seminary board of directors that I attended, Dallas Seminary. And yet what I found was there were days when I would go in and out of their back porch area where they kept a lot of their gardening stuff, and they had 3 locks on the back door. Why? Because they were afraid of losing their stuff. And there were days when I'd go outside and I'd be working and I'd go back in and I couldn't get in the door because they'd locked it on me. Now, if you're thinking like if I'd have been 10 years younger at that point in time, I'd have thought, well, this is great. They're paying me $8 an hour to stand here and try to get in the door. That wasn't my mindset at the time. But the reality is am I accumulating things that I'm fearful that moth and rust are going to destroy or thieves are going to break in and steal? Or am I accumulating something that keeps its value because it has eternal value and it honors and glorifies God? That's an important decision we make. And as we make an accurate assessment of our accumulations, we need to stop and say, okay, now let's make an accurate assessment of the attitude that we have about our stuff. What attitude do I have? Am I fearful of losing it? Am I fearful of what can happen? What do I consider to be important, valuable, necessary, or essential? And you know what? I guarantee that for many of us that are in my generation, the values that we have today, the things that we look at as essential, are far different than they were when we were kids. At least if you're like me, I didn't grow up in a very wealthy. We had plenty. My mom and dad, there was plenty for all of us all the time. But yet, culture has changed and values have changed. And the things that I consider to be essential today are a little bit different. And it's not merely because I was young back in that day and age. It's because life has changed. And my attitude towards stuff has changed. So what do I consider to be important? What do I consider to be valuable, necessary, or essential? What's my perspective about my possessions? Do I recognize, as we taught the last 2 weeks, that we are stewards of what God's given us? We're stewards of God's resources? Or do we say, no, it's mine? And that leads to the question, is selfishness or pride a problem? We also need to do an accurate assessment of my ambitions. What would be my motive? Why? Why do I accumulate this? What's the purpose? Whom am I trying to please or impress by this? Why is this valuable? Just why? Or is it genuinely beneficial? Is it good? Those are all questions that we ask ourselves as we accurately assess, what am I accumulating? What is my attitude towards my accumulations? And what is my ambition? My ambitions. Why? Is it security? Is it personal esteem, worth, or pride? Is it power or control? Is it pleasure? Is it because if I dress this way, or if I drive this type of car, or if I have this type of home, that I have a status symbol? That all goes away. And therefore, after I make this accurate assessment of what I accumulate, how I look at it, what my ambition is in the first place, I need to admit what my actions actually say about me. I need to accept the fact that the life that I've built with the resources God's provided, they speak volumes about me. Because where your treasure is, there your heart will also be. That's straight from God's Word. That's straight from the mouth of Jesus. And we need to understand that the things that I treasure, they control my heart. And what's my heart? My heart is the control center of my life. My heart is the control center of my life. They drive me. My plans, my purposes, my practices, they all are influenced by the treasure that controls my heart. My choices, my concerns, my character, they're all a result of the treasures that control our hearts. My attitude, my actions, my ambitions. They're all a result of the treasures that control our hearts. And what do we see from this? Well, there's a passage in Proverbs that I want to just point out. I want to say this because this, I believe that this passage in Proverbs was part of where Jesus was basing his thought. Jesus obviously helped whoever wrote this section of Proverbs, probably Solomon. He guided Solomon to say this, and Solomon, he's one that, as he says this, I realize, what was Solomon's life like? Solomon had everything that anybody would ever want, but yet his heart was divided between the riches and the fact that he knew he needed to follow God. And Solomon's writings sometimes can be looked at as depressing, but I think they're enlightening. But Solomon writes this in Proverbs 4:23, where he says, above all else, beyond anything else, at the top of the list, guard your heart. Guard your heart with all diligence, he says. Why? For from your heart flow the springs of life. Jesus says what you treasure will control your heart. So where is my heart? What does my heart treasure? And am I making wise investments? Am I using the resources, the gifts, the blessings that God has afforded me in wise ways? Well, the next 3 verses in this passage, 2 different points, 2 different ideas, but the next 3 verses, they bring us to the next level of how we look at this, how we take and apply this to our lives. Because the next question we ask ourselves is, how's my eyesight? And yeah, I spelled it wrong, but I spelled it right. How's my eyesight? Do I have clear eyes or do I have evil eyes? And the treasures that control our hearts will determine whether we have clear eyes or evil eyes. The way that we guard our hearts from the challenges and the temptations of our culture and society will determine whether we have clear eyes or evil eyes. Notice what the passage says. Jesus expresses here, and he's using figurative language. He's not speaking straightforwardly in this. He's speaking in a very specifically direct way, and he says, the eye of the lamp, or the eye is the lamp of the body, so then if your eye is clear, your whole body will be full of light. Your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light that is in you is darkness, how great is that darkness? Jesus is teaching us here, and he's expressing the idea that the spiritual condition of our eyes is very important. When my eyes are focused on earthly treasures, my life will be filled with darkness. When my eyes are focused on earthly treasures, my eyes will be filled with darkness. Now, when darkness settles in, what happens when we can't see clearly? We begin to stumble and fall. Our eyes have to adjust, and sometimes because there's a blurriness, because there's darkness that's set in, because we can't see clearly, we stumble and fall. When our lives are filled with darkness, what's the result? According to the passage here, we have a hard time seeing the truth. We have a hard time grabbing onto the truth. So the questions we ask then, in view of this, do I suffer from blurred vision? Do I have blurred vision? Is my perception of God, God Almighty, God's Word, what He says, what He teaches, what He shows me, is my perception of God and His promises, is it clouded by an unhealthy obsession with possessions and treasures that only bring temporary comfort and satisfaction? Or to go one step farther, do my treasures make me blind? Do they create so much darkness in my life that I can no longer see the truth? Do I fail to see God's presence in my life because I'm depending on money? I'm depending upon materialism. I'm depending on man-made pleasures to meet my most pressing needs and desires. And as we ask the questions, what happens when we have blurred vision and blindness? Where do they take us? When we have blurred vision or blindness from being obsessed with possessions, where does it lead? Well, it leads to greed and grudges. It leads to broken relationships. Several years ago, some folks very near and dear to me were entrenched in a horrible lawsuit over someone's estate. It got ugly. Got ugly. And the sad thing about it is that there were broken relationships from that whole circumstance. It leads to loneliness. It leads to worry and fear. It leads to selfishness. It leads to a lack of faith. I can't trust God anymore because I've got such poor vision. It leads to emptiness and futility. It leads to slavery and bondage. So that's our segue to the next point, the next idea, the final idea. Is idolatry the issue? Is idolatry the issue? Being obsessed with possessions leads us to slavery and bondage. That's idolatry. Jesus says it so clearly here. He says, no one can serve two masters. You can't have two masters control your life. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to one and you will despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth. So there's a choice that I must consistently make. It's not a once and done option. It's a choice that we need to make consistently. It's something that comes over and over and over again. Do I find security in God's power, God's presence, God's promises, and God's provision? Is that where I find my security? Or am I one that's seeking satisfaction from possessions, personal pleasures, and pride? That's the choice that we consistently have to make. I wish it were a one and done thing. I wish we could do it and it's finished. But it doesn't work that way. We consistently have to say, I need to choose today. Am I going to follow God's direction and trust in His promises, His power, His provisions? Or today am I going to depend on finding satisfaction from my stuff? Just where do I place my confidence? Let's understand something. It's not possible, you cannot do this, to trust in the Lord and also trust in something else at the same time. It's not possible to trust in both. A choice is necessary. And as I look at this, I'm reminded again of another passage in the Proverbs where we see the writer of Proverbs, Solomon, again, we find that he's saying, trust in the Lord with all your heart and don't lean on your own understanding. Acknowledge Him in all your ways, in everything you do. Let Him be the guide of everything you do, and what happens, He will make your path straight. And there's an interesting idea in that, because what's this about straight paths? It's saying, you know what, we won't find any forks or crooked paths on the road. It says that you can't go two directions at the same time. He's talking about trusting and acknowledging God and how it removes all the other choices. He's saying trusting God with all my heart avoids having a divided heart. So we ask, who or what will control my lifestyle? What are the guards that I'm going to put on my heart? What are the things that are going to be parameters for me to live? Am I going to try to straddle the fence and okay, I'll follow this today and I'll follow this tomorrow and back and forth and back and forth, and you know what? Eventually it's going to cause us to be schizophrenic. Because serving two masters always causes confusion. Just, who am I going to serve today? Well, what if that looks better today than what serving God looks like? Being devoted to two masters always leads to controversy. There's always going to be controversy. Being controlled by two masters will always lead to conflict. Let's understand something as we prepare to just go to our applications. God has made a call in our lives for us to have undivided commitment. I know many people say, well, no, that's not possible. And I realize that it's a challenging choice that we have to make, but yet it's a choice that takes away. I'm not saying it eliminates all the problems in our lives, because we become targets to the enemy when we do this. But we're called to an undivided commitment that says we worship God and no other gods. We eliminate the other gods. It means we guard against idolatry. That's in 1 John chapter 5. It says that money and possessions, they may be good servants for us. Yes, they serve me well. What I have in this, it serves me well, but when I begin to serve this, when that becomes my master, problems increase. So very quickly, as we kind of draw some application to all of this, how do I make this practical? How does this relate to my life? How does it fit into my life? What do I do? What are some steps I can take? What are some choices I need to make? Well, number one, let's realize here the Lord isn't saying or even suggesting here. There are people that teach that Jesus is saying that it's wrong to be wealthy. He's not. He's not saying that having money or materials would be wrong. But whenever our possessions become idols or become the focus of our lives, there's danger, there's destruction, there's damage to our relationship with the Lord. There are many, and as I read through different things in preparing for this, there are many that say that our Western culture is ripe with this problem. Because we've become so affluent in this culture that our relationships with God, our commitment, our undivided commitment to the Lord, it wavers. Now, it's not wrong to have stuff, but it's wrong to worship it. Secondly, in this world, I think it's key that we understand that temporary treasures, those things that we enjoy, they will always be a temptation that we need to recognize and reject. We need to be willing to say no to the temporary treasures that are only going to provide a little bit of value for a little while. We need to be careful, understanding that God wants each of us to manage and control our resources well. He wants all of us to manage and control the things that He provides for us in a proper manner. We should never be controlled by them. Being obsessed and distracted by temporary treasures and passing pleasures, again, brings harm to our relationship with the Lord, and it decreases our faith. It decreases our ability to trust Him. We should reject the idea that money and possessions will bring us happiness and joy. Because only the Lord can bring true joy into our lives. Third, let's understand that possessions, people, pleasures, power, prestige, popularity, and pride, a lot of P words there. But all of those things, when they become a central focus of our lives, they drive a wedge between us and God. They put a barrier between us and God. And when we place a high price tag on these things and make them too valuable or important, we're making them into idols. We're making them into things that we worship. And all idolatry, it distracts us from serving God with a sense of devotion, dedication, and undivided commitment that He deserves, that He desires. And I'll add another D word, He demands. Idolatry always distracts us from serving God. And it interferes with our devotion, our dedication, and our undivided commitment. Fourth, everything that we hold near and dear to our hearts influences and impacts the way we live our lives. Everything that we love, everything that we hold close to us and say, I cherish this, I treasure this, it all influences the way that we live our lives. And that's how we establish our priorities. So what from that? We should always look to God's Word for a clear understanding of what we should value, what we should cherish, what we should treasure. Understanding that focusing on possessions, what does it do? It causes spiritual vision problems. It makes God's truth harder to understand, harder to practice, harder to obey. Finally, a proper value system with God as the master of our lives changes the way we live. It makes us unique. It makes us different. When that value system's in place, understand something. And you know, I'm going to say this, and I say this in a very loving, compassionate way. When we're struggling with understanding what the Scriptures tell us, when we're struggling seeing what God's plan and purpose for our lives is, one of the possibilities is that we are allowing certain values to be out of place. And when the proper value system we have with God as master of our lives, when it's changing us, what happens? His Word becomes clearer. We recognize right and wrong in a better way. We become more generous with our time, with our treasures, with our talents. We become less selfish. And the flat-out bottom line is we become more concerned about one another. Our desire as we look toward implementing a mission statement, considering what the values are that drive that statement, looking at a focus of what vision we have for where our church can go. Let's understand that the very first thing, the thing that needs to be in place is that relationship we have with Jesus Christ that puts Him in a prominent position, the primary, the number one place. So let's pray. Father, I thank You today for the opportunity to express these thoughts and these ideas from Your Word. I express very clearly that I'm always struck with a sense of fear and trepidation as to, can I do this? Can I express these truths? And I ask even now as I'm finishing up, Father, that You would take and allow the truths that were most important to ring true in everyone's mind. Erase from anyone's memory the ideas of things that maybe I could have hindered or gotten in the way as I tried to express. Make Your Word clear, Father. Make Your Word practical to all of us. I pray that we can find results from what is expressed in Jesus' words, that we don't store up treasures here on earth, but rather we accumulate things that would be eternal in value. That we would make sure that our eyesight is correct, that our life's not filled with darkness, but rather it's filled with light and clarity, because our values are in place. And that we would commit to undivided devotion and dedication to serving you. Help us, Father. Make that happen, please. I pray that that can be a gentle commitment we make, Father, that it wouldn't take some huge event or some huge circumstance to drive us to our knees, but rather that we would see from the power of your Spirit today and the truth of your word that you want control of our lives. So thank you, we praise you, and we commit this to you in Jesus' name. Amen.